Afternoon to everyone. We want to get started to make the most of our time. This is a terrific group, particularly for a beautiful summer day after the thunderstorms. Let me introduce myself. I'm Kent Hughes from the Woodrow Wilson Center. I run a program there on America and the global economy. We do, as you could see with the booklets we had outside, do a lot of our own work on education and are very interested in terms of education, not only here, but around the world. I want to give a special thanks to the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation that funds our work. Their real interest is on sustainable development and how globalization and global trends are affecting and ideally facilitating sustainable growth in the developing world. I want to say thanks to part of our Wilson Center on the Hill team. David Klaus right there is our consulting director for the program. At the back, standing there vigilantly, is Liz Byers, who's the real force behind everything we do. We have Erica Pincus and H.K. Lee, who are both here helping us out. And then we have our terrific camera team, David Hawkhurst and Alan Atkinson. So I'm delighted and thank them very much. Let me make one more announcement. Our next program will be on the Mexican elections, which are about to happen, and what are their implications for relations between the U.S. and Mexico. Well, we have a star-studded panel to discuss international education today. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order, and then I'm going to ask them to speak in reverse alphabetical order. To my left, far left, we have Patrick Collins, who is the acting director for the Office of Education at USAID. He has a really deep experience in a variety of responsibilities at AID, focusing on education. And before that, he did actually a stint at the Peace Corps headquarters here in Washington. To my immediate left is Barbara Kamara, who had many years working in the District of Columbia on early care and as part of the education administration here in the district. She is now working very actively in Liberia. And we had the pleasure, we led a mission, David and Liz recently led a congressional delegation to visit Ghana and Liberia, and she was very helpful in arranging some interesting meetings for us there. And she also has a Peace Corps experience in her background. And to my right, we're delighted to have Harry Petrinos. He is the lead education economist at the World Bank. And I hope he says something about the benchmarking exercise that he leads at the bank, which is something that we've ourselves have tried to do and tried to learn from, is what works in other countries and how might it be adapted even here in the United States. Well, let me turn this over. I'm being very brief because you all have the bios there in front of you. Let me turn it over to this distinguished panel, and let me start with Harry, if I may.
Okay, thank you very much, Kent. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy talking about our work at the World Bank on education. I was asked to speak briefly on the economic benefits of education. I'll do that. Happy to say that at the World Bank we've been focused on education for many years, and I want to share some of the research that we've either accumulated ourselves or others have contributed to. First, let me say that education as a human right and an essential human service in most of the world receives more attention today than ever in the history of mankind. Today, estimates suggest that more than $2 trillion are spent each year on education around the world. Countries typically spend 4 to 5% of their gross domestic product on education. Roughly 20% of public expenditures go towards education. This has resulted in tremendous expansion of education services. Back in the 1990s, there were more than 100 million children of school-going age out of school. Today, fewer than 60 million are out of school. Also, education is key to achieving the Millennium Development Goals, which we are all signatories to. The World Bank, for its part, has invested more than $60 billion on education in the last 50 years. New commitments have reached $5 billion in 2010 in the wake of the financial crisis. Our new education strategy, about to be launched and published, it's called Learning for All, has three messages: investing early, investing smartly, and investing for all. At the same time, the strategy launches our program on benchmarking education systems. It's called System Assessment and Benchmarking Education for Results. I'm happy to give you more details about this, but it's basically an attempt to compare education policies around the world, focused on high-performing countries, and trying to learn lessons about what policies work. Back to the benefits of education. If we consider education as an investment, as economists often do, we can see that spending on education today, in terms of foregone consumption, in the hopes of higher returns in the future. So in other words, education, seen through the lens of cost-benefit analysis, where costs are the public spending that governments put forward, private expenses borne out of pocket by students and their families, and of course the foregone earnings associated with remaining in school. The benefits include a host of economic considerations, the most easily measured and understood, of course, being income gained as a result of education spending. At the individual level, we have studies for more than 100 countries around the world over time, going back to at least the 1950s, suggest an important fact: a year of schooling increases earnings in the order of 10% a year on average, and perhaps as high as 20% in the poorest countries of the world. So a significant return, however you look at it. Moreover, the earnings associated with education are higher for women on average than for men. In terms of level of education, primary education continues to display the highest returns in the world at about 20% a year as annual returns. But the returns to higher education are also high and increasing in recent years, signaling at the same time significant demand for higher order skills and a danger of widening income inequality in many countries. On average, the returns to schooling are higher in the least developed countries, signaling, again, skill shortages in many countries. Also, focusing investments on the poor is related to equity, and targeted investments have been shown to improve the distribution of earnings, making society more equal over time. And more rigorous analytical studies confirm these overall findings. At the macro level, the importance of education is also evident, especially since attention has been paid to economic growth. Some stylized facts from this: early literacy is seen as a threshold countries must pass in order to grow in the future. Estimates show that a 1 percentage point increase in enrollment rates results in significant increases in enrollment rates and in the contribution to economic growth. Studies show a 1-year average increase in years of schooling in the labor force raises national output by 5 to 15%. Macroeconomic earnings functions suggest that across country, a year of schooling increases growth by 18 to 30%. One of the problems with this is that education spending is often not progressive. While primary education tends to be fairly egalitarian and expanded widely, spending on higher levels of schooling tend to benefit those already better off, leading to inequality in some countries. There are also wider benefits to education beyond simply economic returns through the labor market. More educated women, for example, tend to lower overall fertility. Parental education enhances smaller families. Female education raising the opportunity cost of having children, so fewer children in the future. Age of marriage tends to increase, largely due to school attendance by women. Also, education can reduce infant mortality. A 10 percentage point increase in female primary education is associated with a decrease in infant mortality by 4 deaths per 1,000. To give a concrete example, in Pakistan, an extra year of schooling for an additional 1,000 girls would prevent 60 infant deaths. In general, more educated the parents, particularly the mother, the lower is maternal mortality and the healthier is the child later in life. Rising levels of maternal education reduce the odds of a child dying before age 2. child mortality falls by about 8% for every year of parental schooling. In general, the benefits to education, the externalities associated with investing in schooling are significant. The benefit-cost ratio of health and fertility externalities in Pakistan, for example, is about 3 to 1. So significant benefits from investing in education. Other non-market benefits include people's own health, job search efficiency. Those with better schooling are better at finding jobs. Technological change, schooling helps spur R&D and diffusion of technology. And social cohesion, more schooling in society increases voting and democratic behaviors. Crime has also been shown to decrease as education is increased, and of course, significant reductions in poverty are evident. Many of these estimates, however, are based on years of schooling and don't consider adequately the quality of schooling. We know that in many countries, a year of schooling is not the same. Many children go through a whole primary school cycle without being able to read properly. Studies that do control for schooling quality, what's learned in the classroom, suggest that the benefits of schooling are even greater. Overall, a 1 standard deviation increase in school performance can increase earnings by 12 to 15% over a lifetime. And at the national level, a 1% increase in adult literacy raises productivity by 2.5%. On the missed opportunities that we've experienced over time in countries, with my colleague and friend George Sakharopoulos, we estimated over time what would have occurred had schooling expansion been even more rapid than it was. We looked at the schooling expansion since 1900 and with credible estimates of what would have happened had there been better allocation of resources towards education. We projected losses back between 1900 and 1950 and forward using plausible assumptions about what countries could have done in the past. Our findings suggest that the loss in terms of per capita income is about 15%, or a 1% lower growth rate overall for the country. These are very significant numbers suggesting a significant loss to society for not investing adequately in education. What are the implications of the economic benefits of education? Let me mention 3 specific implications. One is there's a continued need to invest in primary education. Even with the very high enrollment and completion rates we're witnessing, the fact that the quality of education is so poor in many countries suggests that we need to continue focusing on basic education. Number 2, there needs to be an emphasis on general over specific skills. General skills or academic skills are actually the vocational skills that are demanded in the workforce, and we need to continue to invest in these general skills. And third, the returns to higher education have increased significantly in recent years. This suggests we should continue this expansion, but focus more on cost recovery at the higher levels through either selective fees or more student financing through student loans. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on April 13th, 1980, when the phone at my brother's house out at Dale City, Virginia, rang. And as I answered the phone, the person said, "Teacher Ferguson, we won." "Won what?" was my sleepy response. "We took over Liberia," he said. He proceeded to tell me his name and what they had done, trying to make sure that I understood who he was. And he was one of my former students. And that military coup, in a few years after that 1980 time frame, became the 15-year war in Liberia. War is truly devastating. It produces persistent fear and anxiety, which can affect young children's learning and development, as described in the working paper number 9 of the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. And a vital and productive society with a prosperous and sustainable future is built on a foundation of healthy child development. Health in the earliest years and even for women before they become pregnant is certainly very critical, and it lays the groundwork for a lifetime of well-being for children. The introduction of the National Intersectoral Policy on Early Childhood Development for Liberia states, and I quote, "Liberia had for years prior to the war provided services for young children, particularly in education and healthcare, but without a formal policy or implementation framework. These services were in the form of pre-primary facilities and healthcare services from hospitals and clinics. The war, which devastated the country's social and economic infrastructure, destroyed the limited healthcare and education services that young children had been enjoying. The Liberian government has joined the rest of the world in recognizing the need for establishing a formally organized system of early childhood development by providing early childhood policies and implementation plans. The government is determined and committed to developing and implementing an early childhood development policy that's based on the principle of integrated services through intersectoral collaboration in order to achieve holistic development for Liberia's youngest citizens. This policy is laying the foundation for a better start in young children's lives, enabling them to have positive early education and care experiences upon which their future growth and adult development will be established." The end of that quote. The Liberian early childhood development community at all levels, they're certainly very committed, as this policy statement says, but the resources are very limited. And this whole system was given a boost when investor and philanthropist George Soros, who's chairman of the Open Society Foundations, provided a grant to the president of Liberia, the Honorable Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, to assist her in her efforts to rebuild the education system. But the grant was to focus on early education, and you heard talk about primary, and here when you're talking early, they're talking about 2-year-olds, starting at 2 right now, but the policies do speak to starting at birth. The grant was to focus on early education, and President Sirleaf, in case you don't know, was certainly the only woman head of an African country. Just a few statistics about Liberia to give you some context. Right now, there's an 85% unemployment rate in Liberia. And in terms of education, there are 1.4 million students in school, starting at 2 years of age, going through high school, and including some children who are in the advanced accelerated learning program. There are about 580,000 children in pre-primary. These are the 2 to 5-year-olds, but it's not always clear as to whether or not those children really are 2 to 5. I met some 15, 16, 17, 20-year-olds who are in kindergarten. That's because of a piece of legislation that will be changing in this September. There are 606,000 children in the primary schools, that's first grade through 6th grade, 118,000 in junior high, 65,000 in senior high, and 69,000 in this accelerated learning program, a program trying to really help people who are over age to complete school on an accelerated basis. In terms of teachers, in pre-primary, there are 11,500 teachers in the pre-primary, the littlest children, 22,000 in primary, 8,500 in junior high, 3,000 in senior high, and 2,600 in the accelerated learning program. The ratio of student to teacher is 48 for pre-primary. However, I was in several classrooms that had more than 100 2-year-olds and 1 teacher. In pre-primary, the ratio is 1 to 27, in junior high school, 1 to 14, and in senior high school, 1 to 19. Liberia has now established an overall goal for its early childhood programs, and that's to ensure that all children achieve their full potential and are ready for school by providing quality, and you heard quality pointed out earlier as being significant, integrated early childhood services and programs for all children from conception to age 5 through an intersectoral collaboration approach. And there are 4 objectives. You know, this sounds very much like the work here: increasing access, improving the quality, greater community and family involvement, greater collaboration and coordination. Since I've been involved as a consultant in Liberia since August of last year, and there are lots of partners, including the World Bank. They're one of the big partners with the early childhood in Liberia and with education. So let's I'm going to give you a laundry list of things that have been accomplished since January of 2010, and I can talk more about them later. 10 of the ministries in the government are involved in this early childhood development initiative, so it is definitely, interministerial. They have established an early childhood unit that's being supported in large part through the Open Society Foundation. They have an interministerial council. They've been involving civil society, faith-based, and non-governmental organizations in policy development, planning, and model school development. And when the congressional delegation was there, they had the opportunity to see some of the classrooms in a school that last year this time it was 1 to 50 for 2-year-olds and 1 to 50 for 3-year-olds. In the new model classrooms, there's a group size of 30. There are 3 adults. 1 is a volunteer. So there's just some significant change. I do have a few pictures that I printed out there if anybody would like to take a look. These are child-centered classrooms that actually have materials and books. We've established 2 early childhood development resource centers. There's a training and meeting registry, so that now there's a database of who's been to training, what kind of training, and who conducted it. There's a facilities regulations task force because there are new facilities being developed all the time, and sometimes there are death traps, as the families have said. 1 way in, 3 classrooms. So we're now trying to get some regulations finalized later on this year. And then there is a 4-level early childhood training framework, with the first level focusing on parents and the community, just increasing the awareness of the importance and significance of early childhood development. The second level is focused on all of those pre-primary teachers that I mentioned, and it is going to take a while to roll out that particular piece of training. We're sending 15 people to South Africa to become trainers and doing some work with them on level 2. The third level is a certificate program that is not developed, but we'll be developing it in collaboration with the Liberian Teacher Training Project, which is a USAID-funded initiative. And the 4th level relates to higher education. There are no early childhood programs at any of the institutions of higher education in Liberia. So it's a little bit difficult to do capacity building when you don't have people who are trained in this area at the university level. In terms of my role, I have been serving as a mentor and a coach to the team at the Ministry of Education, providing technical assistance, capacity building, partnership development. We had a meeting of partners, 12 partners in December, the first time they had all come together to look at mapping what they're doing and how they're doing it and how we might work more collaboratively and more creatively. The resource center system I've been assisting them with, and then how you develop concept papers, and the monitoring and evaluation system yet to be tackled. And so these are some of the things that have happened. I'd certainly be glad to talk with you a little more in detail about those and respond to your questions. And thank you all for coming this afternoon.
Patrick?
It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to say thank you also to the Wilson Center for inviting me, and also it's a pleasure to be here with this panel. What I'll do is spend most of the time talking about USAID in particular, and then at the end I'll describe just some broader U.S. government efforts regarding education. To set the scene for USAID, there's been significant changes, unprecedented changes in the last year, and the scene was set before the previous administration came in. I'm not sure how many of you followed this, but there were a number of discussions on foreign assistance reform, bipartisan, led by a number of different groups, and I think the overarching concern was donor effectiveness, the effectiveness of investments writ large, and how there could be improvements in this area. So the current administration spent a lot of time working on this, and in terms of USAID, the results, there were a number of working groups with USAID, but also state, and the end result of the reform efforts were called USAID Forward, but they parallel what you're seeing in a lot of executive branch agencies. Number one, there's an enormous, relentless push for evidence-based decision-making. It's not that we didn't do this in the past, but it's just constant. And that's coupled with a demand for increased focus. And for us, quite honestly, it's been painful. We've developed a new USAID strategy, but as we went through this, there was a constant demand for what is the global evidence? Yes, there are infinite needs across the spectrum of education, from beginning pre-birth with solid nutrition, to early childhood, to primary, to secondary, to youth, to workforce, to lifelong learning. But we're just one agency of many different agencies. We're just one player, and what we want is for you to pick a handful of topics that are supported by the evidence and drill down on those relentlessly and try to make a real difference. So the other attributes of USAID Forward were to look at results in terms of significant scale and also significant scalability. And what we've all found over the years is that there's a lot of things that we can do that we know work, and a handful of schools or a handful of districts, but once you translate that into literally national scale, whether it's teacher training or distribution of textbooks, or management information systems, it's not just an issue of resource, it's an issue of capacity, of institutional structuring to literally make that happen at national scale and to be sustained. That's the ultimate challenge, and it has been for all of us for decades. So with the combination of that with also a demand for new procurement reform, they demanded that we not just work with the same organizations, that we take a much closer look at having not just open procurements, but support for government systems, for new partners, for new ways of leveraging our resources with the private sector, and then in particular looking at ways to improve international coordination. And I must say on the latter part, again, it's not that we didn't do that before, but the pressure was very useful, quite honestly. So the end result was a set of parameters for the development of new strategies. The first two out of the gate, just within the last few months, were from health and then for education. And this will be followed by new sector strategies for other sectors within USAID. But the result was absolutely unprecedented. What we used to have at the international level was a set of policies and strategies that were very much kind of a big tent umbrella, and we would basically decentralize decision-making to the individual country level. In this case, it was a sea change. We have 3 goals for education, and they're time-bound with targets for 2 of them. The first one is improve reading skills for 100 million children in primary grades by 2015. That's very, very specific. Again, just absolutely unprecedented in its focus for us. The second goal is improved ability of tertiary and workforce development programs to generate workforce skills relevant to a country's development goals. And then the third goal is increased equitable access to education in crisis and conflict environments for 15 million learners by 2015. So the third goal recognizes the fact that increasingly we find ourselves working in countries affected by either conflict or crisis, and a lot of the recent research shows you really just have to think differently. They're very different environments. We want to emphasize access, but we realize that those countries can find themselves in traps, and if you don't find a way to improve education, you get into cycles of conflict and crisis. Then the first goal takes the issue of quality absolutely head on and then drills down even farther by looking at the issue of early reading ability. And the rationale behind that, I think, as Harry mentioned, is that there's been a lot of research in the last couple of years on quality, but particularly reading, and the results are just heartbreaking. There's certain districts in Mali, for example, where the number of 80% of the kids could not read a single word in 4th grade. And this data is repeated in study after study, even in some of the middle-income countries. We just had a conversation this morning. I won't name the country because the data hasn't been finalized. 4th graders, only 20% could read 10 words a minute. And at that level, not only are you not able to understand by the end of the passage what you started with, so there's no fluency, there's no comprehension. What happens is you're on an irreversible learning trajectory, not just for learning, but for your entire life. You know, less earnings, all your future potential is just irredeemably placed on a lower trajectory. So in this case, it's been honestly, it's been a real challenge for us to get our head around implementing a strategy that's this focused, but at the same time, when we look at the rationale, it does make sense. The interesting thing also is that having this kind of a focus by no means says that any other aspects of education are not important. That's certainly not the case at all. It just means that within USAID, this is what we'll focus on. But it has the added benefit of helping us kind of step up our game in terms of what is the evidence base, what are the interventions that we know are effective, and how can we focus in a more concentrated way on supporting that. And then also in terms of international coordination, it just makes it so much easier to coordinate, because instead of having discussions on an infinite range of topics, they're much more narrow. And that's been extremely exciting, actually, for all of us. Just this morning, just before this, I had a fantastic meeting on knowledge management with one of Harry's colleagues at the bank, similar meetings with DFID, with the Brookings Institute, with the Fast Track Initiative. So in that case, it's been very, very encouraging to see that. I wouldn't say that it's a Washington consensus. We're looking actively at a division of labor, but looking at how we can complement each other's activities in certain specific areas. So that's the USAID strategy. If I look at, it's difficult to generalize, but just to give a general idea of what else the US government is doing in terms of education, first of all, there's multilateral support. The US government provides funds to the World Bank, to UNESCO, to UNICEF, and all the great work that they do. Secondly, other executive branch agencies all have, not all, but many have some type of assistance in areas of international education. Even the Department of Defense, for example, if you look at PRTs in Iraq or Afghanistan, local commanders have a degree of control over resources that they can use to construct new schools. And it's fairly large when you look at it. You wouldn't think that defense would support that, but the budgets are fairly large. U.S. Department of Agriculture, there's money through McGovern-Dole to provide school feeding. Sometimes that's monetized and it's used for more specific technical support. Let's see, the Department of Labor has had a very interesting program on child labor alleviation in a number of countries for the past 8 years or so. Another example would be Peace Corps, of course, which I think is a kind of a proving ground or a starter junior varsity team for many of us that didn't catch the bug of international development. But I think the largest percentage of volunteers in Peace Corps continues to be in the area of education, whether it's basic education or secondary, but again, most volunteers are involved in some type of capacity building through community development activities. So there's a number of other things, but just to give you an idea of U.S. support writ large for education. And thank you again, and happy to answer any questions.
You can tell I'm not quite as tall as the previous speaker. We give preference in the question period to congressional staff, but we welcome, of course, all your questions. And when you ask a question, if you just would please identify yourself before launching into the question itself. Well, I have always have a couple questions in my pocket for this distinguished panel, and I'm thinking of Harry's benchmarking exercise and how you try to look at, say, what works in Finland, which ranks very high, or Shanghai has done very well in these international tests, or Japan and some other parts of Europe and East Asia. Does the Peace Corps or does Liberia take a look at that kind of thing and perhaps learn from what seems to work elsewhere?
Well, does the Peace Corps may take a look at some of it, but certainly when you talk about governments and what they look at, very often they don't have people who can take the time to do that. Mm-hmm. And they depend, I think, a lot on the international NGOs and their partners. And I also find that they don't even know how to track sometimes what their partners are doing. You know, the World Bank has a specific strategy and a way that they come in, and they come in on a regular basis to try to monitor and help people with planning. But if consultants are in there or other resource people or people have traveled, then they look at what has happened. But otherwise, they don't necessarily do it. At least I'll just speak for all.
Patrick, any? Does this work? Yes, that should work.
Which again is very much needed and useful. I think it's a huge step forward. At the same time, we all realize that every country is absolutely different, and it has its own unique context and culture and systems. So I think it's helpful for us to be cognizant that we're not looking for chock-a-block menus and you just impose, one approach from one country into another. At the same time, when you are engaged in policy dialogue, whether it's with the ministries or district officials or even principals, oftentimes the question will be, okay, I know what the problems are. Help me think through how have other people dealt with it. I'm not going to adopt it 100%, but just give me an idea of what kinds of things tend to work better. And then what are some of the costs? What are some of the bumps that we can anticipate? What are ways to think about how we might sequence improvements? And just having that kind of a comparison set of contextual items is invaluable. And then, so it ends up being, I think what the bank is working on and others is kind of a global good that we can all continue to contribute to and learn from, realizing that it needs to be interpreted and used by a wide variety of people and in a wide variety of contexts.
Thank you. Those are great talks each of you have given. I'm Marcia Hartwell with the Wilson Center, a public policy scholar. My question is about sustainability. As you all know, schools can be built, but the actual process of getting teachers trained and students to school because of security and other issues, is always a huge challenge. And I'm interested in how each of you view those issues and how they might be addressed. Thanks.
Who'd like to start? Pick on the World Bank here. Let's see if that one works, Harry.
Okay, does this work? Okay, very, very good question. I think there's several approaches that we take, and first, most of our projects would are government programs, so we are directly involved with the program, the official program. So sustainability through national ownership, at least, would be a first step. Also, whatever we do, we would model in terms of what future resource needs it has. So the recurrent costs are factored in, and we would look for something that's affordable going forward. Third, through the analysis, economic and social, on the likely demand for the program and how sustainable that demand would be over time would also be factored in very early on. So those are three things that any investment would have. One of the topics today was on conflict and very difficult circumstances. I want to mention two programs that we're involved with. One, in general, on our work in conflict situations, we have worked with contract teachers, so working with teachers that are on temporary basis, sometimes underqualified at first, and these programs have been evaluated. We have a new report on making schools work, and one of the areas on teacher incentives. Many of these programs have been very useful at getting teachers into schools and ensuring that learning takes place. And over time, in most of these countries, these teachers have improved their skills and become certified teachers and regular public school teachers. The other project I wanted to mention is for the last year or so, we've been working in the Middle East on a program that the United Nations runs for Palestinian refugees. And early on, we noticed that in the PISA and TIMSS results, these schools, at least in Jordan, outperform public schools. They're only for refugees. We would have expected results not as good as this. So we're investigating what factors are associated with these school systems that allow continuity of the program under very difficult circumstances and children's learning that's superior to public schools in a country as stable in the region as Jordan. But we're also finding similar results for Palestine itself, West Bank, and Gaza. So a real conflict situation and a program that's been sustainable since at least 1950s, I think.
We take very seriously this whole area of sustainability because we know that the country is so poor that it's rich in resources because they have diamonds and gold and iron ore, a lot of that. But right now, all of that's not, is kind of, other people are borrowing it outside of the country, and it's not being invested enough inside. So as we have been developing, particularly around the training framework and the classrooms, we have involved people at every level in developing and getting their input and suggestions, and just getting their buy-in. I think that's significant. I think when people don't quite understand how you do things, why it's important to do it, and then that really can be done within the resources that you have, and some of it can. And so that, I think that's been very significant. And to think about the entire continuum. I mean, you heard me mention the 4 levels of education, and that each one, materials are being developed, they're being, librarians are being trained to use it. We're doing field testing and helping people understand what pilot testing actually means and how you do it. So it's not we're doing for people, but working alongside them collaboratively so they learn how to do these things. And I have certainly seen staff be very gratified to be able to stand in front of a group, or to recently when the World Bank was coming in to look at how did they establish the criteria for selecting sites, that they had a little paper using some of their own data. They didn't know how to do that kind of thing. And it wasn't that they didn't want to, but if you've been if you're in a conflict country 15 years without education, you haven't learned how to do it, and the models aren't there. You know, so that's, it's capacity building, it's literacy involvement, it's linking to other services. For instance, another program supported by the Open Society is Critically Thinking Liberia. And so finding those resources and beginning to link people up so that when you're not there, there are resources in their own community, resources frequently they don't realize that are in their communities that they can tap and use. And then as they're preparing people, for instance, the training of trainers, putting together a brochure, which was a very interesting process. We think that these things just like they're simple, but how are you going to select the 15 people who are going? And what is it that they're going to do? And then how do you review applications? So if you begin to help people understand how you do the little things that we take for granted, then I think that helps. They get buy-in and they get very excited about doing it, and then can begin to try to look at ways of sustainability. And that's also why it's so important to not just work on a single ministry and with 2 or 3 donors, but to work across. You've heard both of our other speakers talk about collaboration and coordination. That's easy to say. But to do it on the ground and to help people understand how you do it, we have difficulty here doing it, but to do it on the ground, to help people who don't have the technology right now to do all of that, I think you have to take all of that into consideration. And if you focus on capacity building, not your own capacity, but building the capacity of the people in the community at all levels, at government, and on the ground, then I think you can begin to see some sustainability, but it is going to take a while.
Patrick, you wanted to, I was going to add to sustainability the question of scalability.
Oh, okay.
Something we're wrestling with here where we see some successes, but can we do them nationally?
I think one of the biggest steps forward has been the Paris Declaration on donor effectiveness a couple years ago, and the highlights the issue of nationally owned education plans. And again, it's not that was a new concept per se, but it reiterated the fact that it's not about us, it's about them. It's their countries, it's their systems, their families and children. And if there is a genuinely country-owned national education plan that gets into detail and can be costed in terms of, okay, well, how are you advancing your teacher professional development system or your curriculum standards and your assessment systems and your teacher allocation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then rather than each donor or foundation thinking about their own pilot effort, then how do they scale that up? It's more about how are our efforts directly contributing to this national effort. And that's the dominant mode that we all try to operate in. Sometimes it's hard. Everyone, you kind of come from your own perspective. But I must say, I think education, we didn't just start this. Most of the countries I go to, I think the roundtables on this are pretty well functioning. And the other advantage there is that you're able to look at not just sustainability, but scale in terms of the national plan, and then hold each other accountable mutually. So this plays itself out in various ways. In some instances, the donors and the government will say, okay, organization X, if you're going to do support for development of school management committees, either do it nationally or let's look at how we can divvy it up so that we do have national scale. This donor take these 5 provinces, this donor take these 5 provinces, something like that. And then you meet on it, whether it's monthly or quarterly. And it's, that's the way it works in practice. So I think it's, the wheel's always rolling, but there has been a lot of progress there. The last thing I'd say is that sometimes you look at sustainability differently. In a lot of countries, we've supported, not just us, a number of donors, community schools. If the option is some kind of a community school because otherwise there's absolutely nothing, or accelerated learning, the sustainability may be intentionally only 5 years until regular systems can be can be set up. So it's not always forever. Sometimes you need to think about it in terms of shorter term coverage. But then also being systemic about where would you invest, what are the poorest districts, are the most underserved, what are the gender issues associated with making sure that your investments are useful and effective.
Gentleman back there. We'll get a microphone to you in just a second.
Good afternoon. I highly enjoyed each of your talks. My name is Eugene Smith. I'm a recent graduate from Morgan State University with a bachelor's in psychology, and I'll be starting in the fall in my master's of higher education. And currently I work at the U.S. Department of Education in the Office of Secondary Elementary Education. So I'm very interested in student development. I'm very interested in the Peace Corps. But in all of your talks, the central theme, I would say, was on evidence-based, and in my background, we call that quantitative data. But my question in student development, while you're working in Liberia and in the Peace Corps programs, excuse me, what are the qualitative factors that you're working on in your projects as far as the whole person of the student, as far as their social awareness? Because I believe, this is just my opinion, most of the conflict-driven society is due to their social ability to communicate as a community. So what are the student development practices that are happening in the program that looks at the qualitative rather than the quantitative data of the programs?
We think of you as Mr. Science-based.
That's a great question. I'm just thinking, I remember when when our teams first went in, the lack of data was on almost everything. You know, there was no EMIS system. There was not the usual data that tends to come from UNESCO Institute of Statistics that would give you some kind of a handle on enrollment levels, and that was a real struggle. It continues to be a struggle, and also you don't want the data to just be something that's externally driven only for reporting, or you need to look consciously at how you can support development of internal systems and then support capacity development. Honestly, the thing that strikes me mainly in that respect, and here too, this is an area where there's been a lot of donor coordination, is on trying to not spend infinite time on data collection, but look at varieties of assessments related to conflict countries like that. And there's a donor working group. There's also the International Network of Education Emergencies that's done a lot of work in standard setting. But the things that jumped out to not just our folks, but everyone, was the degree of let's see, how do I say it? The fact that you almost had an entire culture that was in shock. I mean, the percentages of, a lot of it's anecdotal data, the number of women raped is just incomprehensible. The number of atrocities witnessed or conducted, the fact that people would have, they knew who did it, they're still in the communities, the arms that are still hidden, I mean, all those kinds of things that are the reality of the social life there. On the one hand, yes, as an education person, you think about, okay, well, how do we work with this system, or these kind of technical things, but you know that the underlying emotional dynamic within the country is just almost incomprehensible for most of us, that didn't live it for year after year after year. So that's an example of where the import is hugely, it's almost impossible to overestimate. If you don't do it right, you're going to basically reinstitutionalize either racism or corruption or all kinds of bad things can happen if you don't try to get a handle on that. But it's very difficult, so A lot of it's kind of quick and dirty, but it is an area where there's been a lot of work, and a lot of work will continue to be done. If anyone's interested, I'd highly encourage you. It's very exciting and extremely important.
I think because the students we're talking about are fairly young, it's focusing teachers on how you work in child-centered classrooms instead of the traditional stand in front of the room with a piece of chalk with a lot of children. So we are trying to do a lot with teacher development and parent engagement and children working collaboratively and alternative approaches to discipline. The Peace Corps Friends of Liberia group, for instance, has been doing quite a bit of work around let's see if we can't put away the sticks. Let's see if we can't have other materials in our classrooms so that children can be engaged in a different way. So it's really you're trying to help people work on an approach to education that they haven't seen anywhere. And I've seen some very interesting stories as people cried over giving up their sticks that they stand up there with. Mental health there's a lot of depression in countries like this, and I was told don't mention mental health. But that's an area, I mean, the social emotional development of young children, their families, all of that is very important. So you have to try to weave it into what you're doing. And some of it we haven't gotten to the point where we have systems to document, a lot of this. And so we are looking around. That's certainly one of the things that we do as a team is to try to find other strategies that somebody else has used to see if we can look at them and how they can be adaptive. And I think that, to me, one of the questions was, what can the U.S. do? I think if we could begin to have a kind of a series of materials or resource centers or something where we could talk back and forth with each other about the kinds of challenges that we see and how other people have addressed them, I think that would be something that would be extremely helpful and useful.
We can't talk science-based education without turning to a chief economist here.
Lead economist.
Lead economist.
Thank you. You're absolutely right that at the aggregate level, at the country level, most of our indicators, all of our indicators are quantitative, and that's what we use to measure our programs. But just like USAID, the bank has been pushed to be more evidence-based. And in our research, we were able to, at the same time that we're monitoring the quantitative indicators, also include qualitative research. This has been very useful for us. And I can give you a few examples. In our early childhood research, we of course measure children's well-being with many different indicators: physical, social, emotional. Our work on school council, school committee, school-based management, a lot of qualitative research can be included there, looking at aspects such as participation, relations between teachers and parents, students and teachers, perceptions, very important aspect of the learning process that we can only measure when we do the on-the-ground research. In our work on the UN schools in the Middle East for Palestinian refugees, we have a whole component of qualitative research, including the study of resilience, to find out why students under these difficult circumstances are able to learn. Another issue in many of our countries, and speakers have already discussed, is the question of safety. In a program in Bogota, we researched the significant performance of what are known as concession schools, public schools that are managed by the private sector, much like charter schools here. And one of the benefits to the children of these schools was the safety, the safe environment within this school, given the very violent nature of the society in which they lived. And also in our impact evaluations, we include classroom observation studies that allow us to find out what happens in the classroom, how much time is devoted to learning, to what kind of learning, and to what kind of classroom management programs.
So, Lady Dan, we'll have to make this the last question. We're
scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And I'm curious if you might comment on the community buy-in in terms of education as a value. I understand that you're measuring what's happening with the students in the schools and the learning process there, but are you seeing it extend beyond the classroom and seeing it being embraced as a value within the larger community as well?
Harry, do you want to start with
Sure.
Harry's got a microphone. We'll start there this time.
Thank you. in several research projects that I've been involved with. And at the bank, we right now have over 100 randomized studies ongoing, and about 20 to 30 of those, I believe, are on school-based management programs. So the community is very important in these programs. And we've learned a couple of things that are very important. One is that some of these programs that are very well designed, that attempt to increase participation in the community at the school level, are not very well disseminated. A very famous study of a program in India, they surveyed the members of the committee. The majority didn't know that there was a committee and that they were a part of it. So there's a real issue in designing these programs. It has to be done differently. The programs that are successful show a very high level of participation of parents, even parents that otherwise illiterate parents, very poorly educated, are able to contribute significantly to the school's functioning, whether it's small-scale activities like painting walls or repairing doors and windows, and even programs where they're required to play some role in designing a school improvement plan. So a properly designed program can really get the community buy-in that's required. And what we've also learned, it's the poorest communities that require a bit of a push to get the community participation up, but they also need capacity building and to help them make these decisions more effectively.
Barbara Patrick?
I think that what I've seen, and even from back in the 60s when I was a Peace Corps volunteer there, people are interested in education. I think they understand it, they value it, and when you see the numbers of children who go, although when we had the congressional visit, there were children hanging around looking through who wanted to come in and couldn't come because of fees, but I have seen significant involvement of the community at every level. And in early childhood, it's required that before you can go in, you really have to work with the community. And if the community wants assistance in supporting a school, and the ministry will provide teachers for these schools where there are 2- and 3-year-olds, and they may still have large ratios, but they have to make a commitment. They make land available to build a structure and all that. So you see a lot of that. I see a lot of that happening throughout the country, even in the real isolated areas where you have to walk to get there because there's not a road to get you there. And I think that's you talk about education, but you also have to have this access. Like if all the donors got together and helped to put roads in Liberia, a lot more things could happen. But because you
and this kind of goes back to the evidence base. I mean, I think many of us spent years supporting a variety of community involvement models, whether it was school management committees or PTAs or issues of decentralization, and some of those are effective, some of those aren't in terms of having meaningful participation. But if you look at whether or not did it actually do anything to increase access or learning, not necessarily. It's pretty murky. And there's been a number of tools. We've supported some, the bank has, that have actually looked at this. One, for example, is it's called the School Snapshot of Management Effectiveness. And what it does is it combines early grade reading assessments, and these can actually be done even by parents. So it demystifies it. You take a passage in a local language, and then first of all, see if the kids even recognize the letters of the alphabet, or if they have any phonemic awareness. Can they, if so, how many words can they read? If so, can they read a passage? If so, can they answer comprehension questions? And it really takes it down to the school, teacher, community level. But this particular instrument also measures math proficiency, and it measures kind of time on task, opportunity to learn. A whole nother area of research that we knew about but didn't really look at closely enough. And again, when you look at the data, again, something that I saw just yesterday out of this one country, and I won't say it because it will blow your mind, out of expected 180 days of instruction, they were not getting even 30. So you could have the best teacher in the planet, and those kids are not going to get the grade level. And whether it's teacher absenteeism or sickness or just kind of dumbing around, sweeping the compound, or any number of things, I mean, literally there's not enough time to learn even by any stretch what's actually assumed that you would learn at grade level and then be able to progress. But if you combine that kind of data with school support so that there can be accountability that's not punitive, but again, it's helping everyone become more aware of what's actually happening at the classroom and school level, and then use that data so that they can help each other improve accountability so that community involvement and participation is towards a higher level goal, then you've got something really, really powerful.
Two just quick items. On your table, you have this Woodrow Wilson card. Delighted to have you fill it out and indicate what programs you'd be interested in learning about at the center. Reminder that our next session is June 28th in room B354 on the Mexican elections. Patrick, Barbara, and Harry, I want to thank you very much. You are all three very much on the front lines of the future. Please join me in a round of applause for this outstanding panel.